Welcome, my friends and viewers, to this week's episode of Legendlore, where I draw and talk about monsters, characters, gods, and other things from a variety of tabletop RPGs, all while giving a small but quickly digestible history about them. Together we go over their roles within the game, how they're utilized in the modern edition, and how you guys can utilize them in your own games. This week we'll be returning back to the Mörk RPG by going over the Wretched royalty class, one of the many optional classes that you can choose to play for some additional game mechanics and flavor beyond just the base game. As a simple overview, the Wretched royalty is focused primarily on regaining their lost glory, whilst avoiding having to bow and scrape before lesser barbaric peons. To them, they shouldn't even be out here adventuring in the mud in the first place, but either your wretched reputation has caused no one to come and take the job for you, or you can't afford to pay anyone to take it on. And so you relent to the old adage of, if you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. The Wretched royalty can be found on page 52 of the Mörk game manual, with an amount of starting hit points equaling a 1d6 plus their toughness bonus. They begin play with an amount of silver equal to 4d6 times 10, thus being the richest of the main classes, and also start with 1d2 omens, which are special one-time abilities that allow you to beat out combat, overcome obstacles, and influence the outcome of certain situations. All omens can be found on page 38 of the Mörk book. Now, when creating a Wretched royalty character, the first thing you choose is the reason for your fall from grace, and so you can choose or roll a d6 in order to decide how things were going so well until ... A lot of this is based off of Borg's campaign setting, but you could very easily adapt it to your own world if you need to. On a 1, your once regal palace of the Kingdom of Westland was reduced to ashes, be it by a lack of care, harsh storms, a demonic ritual gone wrong, or just good old-fashioned peasant rebellion. On a 2, your legion of caravans in Vejland, once rich and prosperous through trade, has since fallen into destitution and poverty, resulting in thefts, murders, and all-around chaos which forced you to flee. On a 3, your father, Sigmund, who was the brother of the great king of Schleswig, Fathmu IX, was murdered. How, when, where, and who is really up to you, but his murder left you defenseless and forced to flee. On a 4, the empire of Sudglans in the south, which you called home, sank into the depths and was consumed by the sea. This could have been the work of a maniacal sea cult, a massive, dangerous sea serpent, or just plain bad luck of being built on a precarious set of cliffside. Out of 5, the pale Queen Anthalia of Alliance, known for draining both color and life force, demanded a gift of noble blood in the form of you. Refusing to die so that a few dregs may live, you fled to save your own skin, which may or may not have its own set of consequences for the land. And finally, at 6, 2 young princes may have been kidnapped within an area that is considered to be under your purview, vanishing into the slopes and leaving you to shoulder the blame. This is typically identified as an area called Borg and Crypt within the campaign setting, but you can always change it to fit your needs. After selecting your fall from grace, you get to choose a noble holdover, which is essentially one remnant of your nobility that you have refused to part with, ranging from a magic sword to a variety of hirelings to even a talking horse. As with the last decision, you can choose to roll a 1d6 or decide which one you want. With that said, on a 1, you get the Blade of your Ancestors, which despite being in your family for generations, hates your guts and acts just as arrogant and haughty as you do. While it deals 1d6 plus 1 damage to your enemies and changes your difficulty rating for attack and defense to 10 instead of 12, the sword, if constantly disappointed by your failures to regain nobility, slay your enemies, or whatever other endeavor you take on, has a 1 in 6 chance to attack you and your allies. The blade functioning as its own character in adventures is great for both comedic roleplay and as a tool for game masters to have a voice in the party without having to control an entirely new stat block. The theme of the sword is also left up to interpretation, so it can range from a righteous holy sword, a malevolent soul-drinking blade, or just some poor bastard whose soul got sucked into the sword upon dying within close proximity of it. Perhaps you can even think about how the sword fell into your family's possession in the first place. On a 2, your Wretched royalty has managed to maintain the employment and loyalty of his court jester named Poltroon, who, despite being functionally useless and emotionally taxing, may be useful in distracting the enemy. When he is around, you and your party have a +2 bonus to all attack and defense rolls within the first 2 rounds of combat. As to whether or not he can be killed, that really depends on the game master, but I am sure that the players will at least mourn the bonus that he gave to combat, if not the jester himself. Upon rolling a 3, you get what is my personal favorite of the Wretched nobility holdovers, that being Barbster the Incredible Horse, a magical, arrogant steed who believes himself to be smarter than you and probably is. If you can successfully convince Barbster to allow you to bask in his intellect, you could potentially get a +2 bonus to any presence test having to do with intelligence and logic, but that's only if you're truly convincing. Barbster is entirely capable of lying and giving false answers that can lead the party into danger, and he'll most likely buck and kick you if you try to use him as a traditional steed. This can again add great roleplay opportunity to the game, and perhaps add a touching arc where you come to terms with your eternal inferiority to the incredible Barbster, but realize that you can still be friends despite this intellectual divide. On a 4, your character retains the loyalty and the use of a cowardly squire named Hamfund, who, despite being utterly useless in combat, provides an interesting addition to any and all dungeons you may explore. Hamfund is the guardian of the scabbard of the legendary cursed sword Urekia, and once per combat, if Hamfund can be found, you may draw the sword and wield it for this encounter. The sword itself deals 2d6 damage, the highest damage of any weapon in the game, but for every swing you make of the sword, you must roll a d6. On a 1, Hamfund is actually killed and the sword forever vanishes, never to be wielded again by the likes of you. On a 5, you retained a gifted sandalwood box wrapped in snakeskin, which contains a seemingly ordinary dagger seated in a blanket of silk. The dagger itself only deals 1d4 damage, but upon rolling a 1 on the d4, the target of this attack immediately dies from the poison on the blade. This is a great little risk versus reward item that channels the old school idea of rolling lower for better results, and the poison does not identify that the creature needs to be medium sized or larger to be affected, so you could feasibly take down massive trolls and ogres with this thing if you roll right. If your wretched royalty is feeling particularly kind, maybe they can loan it to the party's gutterborn scum rogue, since they would probably be the one to make the best out of using it. And lastly, on a 6, you get the Horn of the Schleswig Lords. A magic horn that, if blown, lets you roll a DR12 presence roll once per day. On a success, one creature may treat their next non-combat roll as an automatic success, which is incredibly useful for those tense moments where success is viciously needed. Now, I wouldn't recommend blasting the horn while your thief is trying to break into the safe of your noble rival to steal his riches, but it could lead to a very fun chase scene if played properly. Ultimately, the wretched royalty must decide if the risk of all enemies hearing the horn's blast and coming down upon you is worth whatever the automatic success might be. Now that we've covered all the character options and items, while Borg is more about the frequent deaths of your characters, if your GM is kind or if you want a little bit more meat to chew on beyond just playing a big bag of hit points, here are a couple of ideas to set your wretched nobility apart from the rest. The best ways to do that are to look at your character's relationship with their place of origin, as well as their starting item. For instance, for the former, if you were a noble from Westland and your manor had burned down, come up with an idea as to why that was the case. Was it burned down as a result of a peasant rebellion? Did an angry god strike it down with lightning? Did a servant knock over a candle and it just got out of hand? Ultimately, the why of these things is very important because it may inform what kind of horrors you discover as you adventure through the world of Borg. Perhaps your Dvalan caravan kingdom suffered poverty due to plague, or maybe it tore itself apart by devolving into cannibalism as the food became more and more scarce. A personal favorite of mine is the 6th result, where a pair of princes go missing around Bergen Crypt. With this origin, your game master has a trove of things to work with for the game, such as making interesting and colorful NPCs in the form of the prince's noble peers and hired mercenaries who are currently searching for them. Then there's also the opening for the creation of a dungeon, where the prince's corpses might reside awaiting recovery. Who knows, maybe the princes are in all actuality alive and just awaiting rescue, albeit slightly changed by their experiences. Then, on the flip side, you can mine for backstory, NPC, and dungeon ideas by looking at what items your wretched nobility has retained. Hamfund the Squire, Poltron the Jester, and especially your ancestral sword and the Horse Barbarista are all great for not just having entertaining side characters, but they can also allow the game master to have a voice in the party without having to run an entirely separate character. You can help steer your players in and out of danger, remind them of things that they missed or forgot, and give both good or bad advice depending on which NPC you're playing. For instance, I believe Hamfund would probably be an utter coward and would always recommend running away, whereas Poltron might speak exclusively in rhyme. It's ultimately up to you how you want to interpret it. As for the remaining items, such as the sword Urekia that Hamfund keeps, the poison blade from the snakeskin gift, as well as the horn of Schleswig, each one has their own origin within the game world and thus has a story associated with them. The snakeskin gift dagger could have been made from the fang of a legendary serpent god, and the noble who wields it can be endlessly pursued across the continent by a cult of evil snakemen. On the other hand, should Hamfund die in a combat and Urekia be lost forever, your game master can present an opportunity for you to reclaim the sword by venturing to its place of rest, where it returns to upon being freed from the scabbard. This can just make for an excellent dungeon overall. With all that said, while Borg has a very heavy emphasis on survival horror, risk, and frequent character death, I do think it's important to have some details figured out on the off chance that you manage to make it past your first few levels, or if you just want something else to chew on besides the slow encroaching of world-ending madness. With that said, that's our coverage of the Wretched Royalty in Borg, everybody. I want to thank all of you guys for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe, and press the little bell icon to be notified of future videos. If you guys want to have a chance to vote on the next video, follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and check out the YouTube community tab for the polls as they come out. Also, please comment down below your experiences with the Borg game, if you yourself had the chance to run the Wretched Royalty class, and let me know what else you guys would like to see in upcoming videos. But until then, I'll see you guys next time.